I did not want to wake Harris a second time, but the gnawing continued until I was compelled to throw the other shoe. This time I broke a mirror. There were 2 in the room. I got the largest one, of course. Harris woke again, but did not complain, and I was sorrier than ever. I resolved that I would suffer all possible torture before I would disturb him a 3rd time. The mouse eventually retired, and by I was sinking to sleep when a clock began to strike. I counted till it was done, and was about to drowse again when another clock began. I counted. Then the 2 great Rathaus clock angels began to send forth soft, rich, melodious blasts from their long trumpets. I had never heard anything that was so lovely or weird or mysterious. But when they got to blowing the quarter hours, they seemed to me to be overdoing the thing. Every time I dropped off for a moment, a new noise woke me. Each time I woke, I missed my coverlet and had to reach down to the floor and get it again. At last, all sleepiness forsook me. I recognized the fact that I was hopelessly and permanently wide awake and feverish and thirsty. When I had lain tossing there as long as I could endure it, it occurred to me that it would be a good idea to dress and go out in the great square and take a refreshing wash in the fountain, and smoke and reflect there until the remnant of the night was gone. I believed I could dress in the dark without waking Harris. I had banished my shoes after the mouse, but my slippers would do for a summer night. So I rose softly and gradually got on everything, down to 1 sock. I couldn't seem to get on the track of that sock any way I could fix it, but I had to have it. So I went down on my hands and knees with 1 slipper on and the other in my hand, and began to paw gently around and rake the floor, but with no success. I enlarged my circle and went on, pawing and raking. With every pressure of my knee, how the floor creaked, and every time I chanced to rake against any article, it seemed to give out 35 or 36 times more noise than it would have done in the daytime. In those cases, I always stopped and held my breath till I was sure Harris had not awakened. Then I crept along again. I moved on, but I could not find the sock. I could not seem to find anything but furniture. I could not remember that there was so much furniture in the room when I went to bed, but the place was alive with it now, especially chairs everywhere. Had a couple of families moved in the meantime? And I never could seem to glance on one of those chairs, but always struck it full and square with my head. My temper rose by steady and sure degrees, and as I pawed on and on, I fell to making vicious comments under my breath. Finally, with a venomous access of irritation, I said I would leave without the sock. So I rose and made straight for the door, as I supposed, and suddenly confronted my dim spectral image in the unbroken mirror. It startled the breath out of me for an instant. It also showed me that I was lost and had no sort of idea where I was. When I realized this, I was so angry that I had to sit down on the floor and take hold of something to keep from lifting the roof off with an explosion of opinion. If there had been only 1 mirror, it might possibly have helped to locate me. But there were 2, and 2 were as bad as 1,000. Besides, these were on opposite sides of the room. I could see the dim blur of the windows, but in my turned-around condition they were exactly where they ought not to be, and so they only confused me instead of helping me. I started to get up and knocked down an umbrella. It made a noise like a pistol shot when it struck that hard, slick, carpetless floor. I grated my teeth and held my breath. Harris did not stir. I set the umbrella slowly and carefully on the end against the wall, but as soon as I took my hand away, its heel slipped from under it, and down it came again with another bang. I shrunk together and listened a moment in silent fury. No harm done, everything quiet. With the most painstaking care and nicety, I stood the umbrella up once more, took my hand away, and down it came again. I have been strictly reared, but if it had not been so dark and solemn and awful there in that lonely, vast room, I do believe I should have said something then which could not be put into a Sunday school book without injuring the sale of it. If my reasoning powers had not been already sapped dry by my harassments, I would have known better than to try to set an umbrella on end on one of those glassy German floors in the dark. It can't be done in the daytime without 4 failures to 1 success. I had one comfort, though. Harris was yet still and silent. He had not stirred. The umbrella could not locate me. There were 4 standing around the room, and all alike. I thought I would feel along the wall and find the door in that way. I rose up and began this operation, but raked down a picture. It was not a large one, but it made noise enough for a panorama. Harris gave out no sound, but I felt that if I experimented any further with the pictures, I should be sure to wake him. Better give up trying to get out. Yes, I would find King Arthur's Round Table once more. I had already found it several times, and use it for a base of departure on an exploring tour for my bed. If I could find my bed, I could then find my water pitcher. I would quench my raging thirst and turn in. So I started on my hands and knees, because I could go faster that way, and with more confidence, too, and not knock down things. By and by I found the table, with my head, rubbed the bruise a little, then rose up and started, with hands abroad and fingers spread, to balance myself. I found a chair, then the wall, then another chair, then a sofa, then an alpenstock, then another sofa. This confounded me, for I had thought there was only one sofa. I hunted up the table again and took a fresh start, found some more chairs. It occurred to me now, as it ought to have done before, that as the table was round, it was therefore of no value as a base to aim from. So I moved off once more, and at random among the wilderness of chairs and sofas, wandered off into unfamiliar regions, and presently knocked a candlestick off a mantelpiece, grabbed at the candlestick and knocked off a lamp, grabbed at the lamp and knocked off a water pitcher with a rattling crash, and thought to myself, "I've found you at last. I judged I was close upon you." Harris shouted, "Murder!" and "Thieves!" and finished with, "I'm absolutely drowned." The crash had roused the house. Mr. X pranced in his long night garment with a candle, young Z after him with another candle. A procession swept in at another door with candles and lanterns, landlord and 2 German guests in their nightgowns, and a chambermaid in hers. I looked around. I was at Harris's bed, a Sabbath day's journey from my own. There was only one sofa. It was against the wall. There was only one chair where a body could get at it. I had been revolving around it like a planet and colliding with it like a comet half the night. I explained how I had been employing myself and why. Then the landlord's party left, and the rest of us set about our preparations for breakfast, for the dawn was ready to break. I glanced furtively at my pedometer and found I had made 47 miles. But I did not care, for I had come out for a pedestrian tour anyway. Chapter 14. When the landlord learned that I and my agent were artists, our party rose perceptibly in his esteem. We rose still higher when he learned that we were making a pedestrian tour of Europe. He told us all about the Heidelberg Road, and which were the best places to avoid, and which the best ones to tarry at. He charged me less than cost for the things I broke in the night. He put up a fine luncheon for us, and added to it a quantity of great light green plums, the pleasantest fruit in Germany. He was so anxious to do us honor that he would not allow us to walk out of Heilbronn, but called up Götz von Berlichingen's horse and cab and made us ride. I made a sketch of the turnout. It is not a work, it is only what artists call a study, a thing to make a finished picture from. This sketch has several blemishes in it. For instance, the wagon is not traveling as fast as the horse is. This is wrong. Again, the person trying to get out of the way is too small. He is out of perspective, as we say. The two upper lines are not the horse's back, they are the reins. There seems to be a wheel missing. This would be corrected in a finished work, of course. That thing flying out behind is not a flag, it is a curtain. That other thing up there is the sun, but I didn't get enough distance on it. I do not remember now what that thing is that is in front of the man who is running, but I think it is a haystack, or a woman. This study was exhibited in the Paris Salon of 1879, but did not take any medal. They do not give medals for studies. We discharged the carriage at the bridge. The river was full of logs, long, slender, barkless pine logs, and we leaned on the rails of the bridge and watched the men put them together into rafts. These rafts were of a shape and construction to suit the crookedness and extreme narrowness of the Neckar. They were from 50 to 100 yards long, and they gradually tapered from a 9-log breadth at their sterns to a 3-log breadth at their bow ends. The main part of the steering is done at the bow with a pole. The 3-log breadth there furnishes room for only the steersman, for these little logs are not larger around than an average young lady's waist. The connections of the several sections of the raft are slack and pliant, so that the raft may be readily bent into any sort of curve required by the shape of the river. The Neckar is in many places so narrow that a person can throw a dog across it, if he has one. When it is also sharply curved in such places, the raftsman has to do some pretty nice snug piloting to make the turns. The river is not always allowed to spread over its whole bed, which is as much as 30 and sometimes 40 yards wide, but is split into 3 equal bodies of water by stone dikes, which throw the main volume, depth, and current into the central one. In low water, these neat, narrow-edged dikes project 4 or 5 inches above the surface, like the comb of a submerged roof. But in high water they are overflowed. A hatful of rain makes high water in the Neckar, and a basketful produces an overflow. There are dikes abreast the Schloss Hotel, and the current is violently swift at that point. I used to sit for hours in my glass cage, watching the long, narrow rafts slip along through the central channel, grazing the right bank dike, and aiming carefully for the middle arch of the stone bridge below. I watched them in this way, and lost all this time hoping to see one of them hit the bridge pier and wreck itself some time or other, but was always disappointed. One was smashed there one morning, but I had just stepped into my room a moment to light a pipe, so I lost it. While I was looking down upon the rafts that morning at Heilbronn, the daredevil spirit of adventure came suddenly upon me, and I said to my comrades, "I am going to Heidelberg on a raft. Will you venture with me?" Their faces paled a little, but they assented with as good a grace as they could. Harris wanted to cable his mother, thought it his duty to do that, as he was all she had in this world. So while he attended to this, I went down to the longest and finest raft and hailed the captain with a hearty "Ahoy, shipmate," which put us upon pleasant terms at once, and we entered upon business. I said we were on a pedestrian tour to Heidelberg, and would like to take passage with him. I said this partly through young Mr. Z, who spoke German very well, and partly through Mr. X, who spoke it peculiarly. I can understand German as well as the maniac that invented it, but I talk it best through an interpreter. The captain hitched up his trousers, then shifted his quid thoughtfully. presently he said just what I was expecting he would say, that he had no license to carry passengers, and therefore was afraid the law would be after him in case the matter got noised about or any accident happened. So I chartered the raft and the crew, and took all the responsibility on myself. With a rattling song, the starboard watch bent to their work, and hove the cable short, then got the anchor home, and our bark moved off with a stately stride, and soon was bowling along at about 2 knots an hour. Our party were grouped amidships. At first the talk was a little gloomy, and ran mainly upon the shortness of life, the uncertainty of it, the perils which beset it, and the need and wisdom of being always prepared for the worst. This shaded off into low-voiced references to the dangers of the deep and kindred matters, but as the gray east began to redden, and the mysterious solemnity and silence of the dawn to give place to the joy songs of the birds, the talk took a cheerier tone, and our spirits began to rise steadily. Germany in the summer is the perfection of the beautiful, but nobody has understood and realized and enjoyed the utmost possibilities of this soft and peaceful beauty unless he has voyaged down the Neckar on a raft. The motion of a raft is the needful motion. It is gentle and gliding and smooth and noiseless. It calms down all feverish activities. It soothes to sleep all nervous hurry and impatience. Under its restful influence, all the troubles and vexations and sorrows that harass the mind vanish away, and existence becomes a dream, a charm, a deep and tranquil ecstasy. How it contrasts with hot and perspiring pedestrianism, and dusty and deafening railroad rush, and tedious jolting behind tired horses over blinding white roads. We went slipping silently along, between the green and fragrant banks, with a sense of pleasure and contentment that grew and grew all the time. Sometimes the banks were overhung with thick masses of willows that wholly hid the ground behind. Sometimes we had noble hills on one hand, clothed densely with foliage to their tops, and on the other hand open levels blazing with poppies, or clothed in the rich blue of the cornflower. Sometimes we drifted in the shadow of forests, and sometimes along the margin of long stretches of velvety grass, fresh and green and bright, a tireless charm to the eye. And the birds, they were everywhere. They swept back and forth across the river constantly, and their jubilant music was never stilled. It was a deep and satisfying pleasure to see the sun create the new morning, and gradually, patiently, lovingly clothe it on with splendor after splendor, and glory after glory, till the miracle was complete. How different is this marvel observed from a raft, from what it is when one observes it through the dingy windows of a railway station in some wretched village, while he munches a petrified sandwich and waits for the train. Chapter 15. Down the River. Men and women and cattle were at work in the dewy fields by this time. The people often stepped aboard the raft as we glided along the grassy shores, and gossiped with us and with the crew for 100 yards or so, then stepped ashore again, refreshed by the ride. Only the men did this. The women were too busy. The women do all kinds of work on the continent. They dig, they hoe, they reap, they sow. They bear monstrous burdens on their backs. They shove similar ones long distances on wheelbarrows. They drag the cart when there is no dog or lean cow to drag it, and when there is, they assist the dog or cow. Age is no matter. The older the woman, the stronger she is, apparently. On the farm, a woman's duties are not defined. She does a little of everything. But in the towns, it is different. There, she only does certain things. The men do the rest. For instance, an hotel chambermaid has nothing to do but make beds and fires in 50 or 60 rooms, bring towels and candles, and fetch several tons of water up several flights of stairs, 100 pounds at a time, in prodigious metal pitchers. She does not have to work more than 18 or 20 hours a day, and she can always get down on her knees and scrub the floors of halls and closets when she is tired and needs a rest. As the morning advanced and the weather grew hot, we took off our outside clothing and sat in a row along the edge of the raft and enjoyed the scenery, with our sun umbrellas over our heads and our legs dangling in the water. Every now and then we plunged in and had a swim. Every projecting grassy cape had its joyous group of naked children, the boys to themselves and the girls to themselves, the latter usually in care of some motherly dame who sat in the shade of a tree with her knitting. The little boys swam out to us sometimes, but the little maids stood knee-deep in the water and stopped their splashing and frolicking to inspect the raft with their innocent eyes as it drifted by. Once we turned a corner suddenly and surprised a slender girl of 12 years or upwards just stepping into the water. She had no time to run, but she did what answered just as well. She promptly drew a lithe young willow bough athwart her white body with one hand, and then contemplated us with a simple and untroubled interest. Thus she stood while we glided by. She was a pretty creature, and she and her willow bough made a very pretty picture, and one which could not offend the modesty of the most fastidious spectator. Her white skin had a low bank of fresh green willows for background and effective contrast, for she stood against them, and above and out of them projected the eager faces and white shoulders of two smaller girls. Towards noon we heard the inspiriting cry, "Sail ho!" "Where away?" shouted the captain. 3 points off the weather bow." We ran forward to see the vessel. It proved to be a steamboat, for they had begun to run a steamer up the Neckar for the first time in May. She was a tug, and one of very peculiar build and aspect. I had often watched her from the hotel and wondered how she propelled herself, for apparently she had no propeller or paddles. She came churning along now, making a deal of noise of one kind and another, and aggravating it every now and then by blowing a hoarse whistle. She had 9 keel-boats hitched on behind, and following after her in a long, slender rank. We met her in a narrow place between dikes, and there was hardly room for us both in the cramped passage. As she went grinding and groaning by, we perceived the secret of her moving impulse. She did not drive herself up the river with paddles or propeller. She pulled herself by hauling on a great chain. This chain is laid in the bed of the river, and is only fastened at the 2 ends. It is 70 miles long. It comes in over the boat's bow, passes around a drum, and is paid out astern. She pulls on that chain, and so drags herself up the river or down it. She has neither bow nor stern, strictly speaking, for she has a long-bladed rudder on each end, and she never turns around. She uses both rudders all the time, and they are powerful enough to enable her to turn to the right or the left, and steer around curves in spite of the strong resistance of the chain. I would not have believed that that impossible thing could be done, but I saw it done, and therefore I know that there is one impossible thing which can be done. What miracle will man attempt next? We met many big keel-boats on their way up, using sails, mule power, and profanity, a tedious and laborious business. A wire rope led from the foretopmast to the file of mules on the towpath 100 yards ahead, and by dint of much banging and swearing and urging, the detachment of drivers managed to get a speed of 2 or 3 miles an hour out of the mules against the stiff current. The Neckar has always been used as a canal, and thus has given employment to a great many men and animals. But now that this steamboat is able, with a small crew and a bushel or so of coal, to take 9 keel boats farther up the river in 1 hour, then 30 men and 30 mules can do it in 2. It is believed that the old-fashioned towing industry is on its deathbed. A second steamboat began work in the Neckar 3 months after the first one was put in service. At noon we stepped ashore and bought some bottled beer and got some chickens cooked while the raft waited. Then we immediately put to sea again and had our dinner while the beer was cold and the chickens hot. There is no pleasanter place for such a meal than a raft that is gliding down the winding Neckar, past green meadows and wooded hills and slumbering villages and craggy heights graced with crumbling towers and battlements. In one place we saw a nicely dressed German gentleman without any spectacles. Before I could come to anchor, he had got away. It was a great pity. I so wanted to make a sketch of him. The captain comforted me for my loss, however, by saying that the man was without any doubt a fraud, who had spectacles but kept them in his pocket in order to make himself conspicuous. Below Hasmersheim we passed Hornberg, Götz von Berlichingen's old castle. It stands on a bold elevation 200 feet above the surface of the river. It has high, vine-clad walls enclosing trees and a peaked tower about 75 feet high. The steep hillside from the castle clear down to the water's edge is terraced and clothed thick with grapevines. This is like farming a mansard roof. All the steeps along that part of the river which furnish the proper exposure are given up to the grape. That region is a great producer of Rhine wines. The Germans are exceedingly fond of Rhine wines. They are put up in tall, slender bottles and are considered a pleasant beverage. One tells them from vinegar by the label. The Hornberg Hill is to be tunneled, and the new railway will pass under the castle. The Cave of the Spectre. 2 miles below Hornberg Castle is a cave in a low cliff, which the captain of the raft said had once been occupied by a beautiful heiress of Hornberg, the Lady Gertrude, in the old times. It was 700 years old. She had a number of rich and noble lovers, and one poor and obscure one, Sir Wendel Lobenfeld. With the naive chuckle-headedness of the heroine of romance, she preferred the poor and obscure lover. With the native sound judgment of the father of a heroine of romance, the von Berlichingen of that day shut his daughter up in his dungeon keep, or his oubliette, or his culverine, or some such place, and resolved that she should stay there until she selected a husband from among her rich and noble lovers. The latter visited her and persecuted her with their supplications, but without effect, for her heart was true to her poor despised crusader, who was fighting in the Holy Land. Finally, she resolved that she would endure the attentions of the rich lovers no longer. So one stormy night she escaped and went down the river and hid herself in the cave on the other side. Her father ransacked the country for her, but found not a trace of her. As the days went by and still no tidings of her came, his conscience began to torture him, and he caused proclamation to be made that if she were yet living and would return, he would oppose her no longer. She might marry whom she would. The months dragged on. All hope forsook the old man. He ceased from his customary pursuits and pleasures. He devoted himself to pious works and longed for the deliverance of death. Now, just at midnight every night, the lost heiress stood in the mouth of her cave, arrayed in white robes, and sang a little love ballad which her crusader had made for her. She judged that if he came home alive, the superstitious peasants would tell him about the ghost that sang in the cave, and that as soon as they described the ballad, he would know that none but he and she knew that song. Therefore he would suspect that she was alive, and would come and find her. As time went on, the people of the region became sorely distressed about the spectre of the haunted cave. It was said that ill luck of one kind or another always overtook anyone who had the misfortune to hear that song. Eventually, every calamity that happened thereabouts was laid at the door of that music. Consequently, no boatman would consent to pass the cave at night. The peasants shunned the place, even in the daytime. But the faithful girl sang on, night after night, month after month, and patiently waited. Her reward must come at last. 5 years dragged by, and still every night at midnight the plaintive tones floated out over the silent land, while the distant boatmen and peasants thrust their fingers into their ears and shuddered out a prayer. And now came the Crusader home, bronzed and battle-scarred, but bringing a great and splendid fame to lay at the feet of his bride. The old lord of Hornberg received him as a son, and wanted him to stay by him and be the comfort and blessing of his age. But the tale of that young girl's devotion to him and its pathetic consequences made a changed man of the knight. He could not enjoy his well-earned rest. He said his heart was broken. He would give the remnant of his life to high deeds in the cause of humanity, and so find a worthy death and a blessed reunion with the brave, true heart whose love had more honored him than all his victories in war. When the people heard this resolve of his, they came and told him there was a pitiless dragon in human disguise in the haunted cave, a dread creature which no knight had yet been bold enough to face, and begged him to rid the land of its desolating presence. He said he would do it. They told him about the song, and when he asked what song it was, they said the memory of it was gone, for nobody had been hardy enough to listen to it for the past 4 years and more. Towards midnight the Crusader came floating down the river in a boat, with his rusty crossbow in his hands. He drifted silently through the dim reflections of the crags and trees, with his intent eyes fixed upon the low cliff which he was approaching. As he drew nearer, he discerned the black mouth of the cave. Now, is that a white figure? Yes. The plaintive song begins to well forth and float away over meadow and river. The crossbow is slowly raised to position. A steady aim is taken. The bolt flies straight to the mark. The figure sinks down, still singing. The knight takes the wool out of his ears and recognizes the old ballad, too late. Ah, if he had only not put the wool in his ears. The Crusader went away to the wars again, and presently fell in battle, fighting for the cross. Tradition says that during several centuries the spirit of the unfortunate girl sang nightly from the cave at midnight, but the music carried no curse with it, and although many listened for the mysterious sounds, few were favored, since only those could hear them who had never failed in a trust. It is believed that the singing still continues, but it is known that nobody has heard it during the present century. Chapter 16. An Ancient Legend of the Rhine. The last legend reminds me of the Lorelei, a legend of the Rhine. There is a song called the Lorelei. Germany is rich in folk songs, and the words and airs of several of them are peculiarly beautiful, but the Lorelei is the people's favorite. I could not endure it at first, but by and by it began to take hold of me, and now there is no tune which I like so well. It is not possible that it is much known in America, else I should have heard it there. The fact that I never heard it there is evidence that there are others in my country who have fared likewise. Therefore, for the sake of these, I mean to print the words and music in this chapter, and I will refresh the reader's memory by printing the legend of the Lorelei, too. I have it by me in The Legends of the Rhine, done into English by the wildly gifted Garnham, Bachelor of Arts. I print the legend partly to refresh my own memory, too, for I have never read it before. The Legend. Lore, 2 syllables, was a water nymph who used to sit on a high rock called Ley or Lei, pronounced like our word lie, in the Rhine, and lure boatmen to destruction in a furious rapid which marred the channel at that spot. She so bewitched them with her plaintive songs and her wonderful beauty that they forgot everything else to gaze up at her, and so they presently drifted among the broken reefs and were lost. In those old times, the Count Bruno lived in a great castle near there with his son, the Count Hermann, a youth of 20. Hermann had heard a great deal about the beautiful Lore, and had finally fallen very deeply in love with her without having yet seen her. So he used to wander to the neighborhood of the Ley evenings with his zither, and express his longing in low singing, as Garnham says. On one of these occasions, suddenly there hovered around the top of the rock a brightness of unequaled clearness and color, which, in increasing smaller circles, thickened, was the enchanting figure of the beautiful Laura. An unintentional cry of joy escaped the youth. He let his zither fall, and with extended arms he called out the name of the enigmatical being, who seemed to stoop lovingly to him and beckon to him in a friendly manner. Indeed, if his ear did not deceive him, she called his name with unutterable sweet whispers proper to love. Beside himself with delight, the youth lost his senses and sank senseless to the earth. After that he was a changed person. He went dreaming about, thinking only of his fairy, and caring for naught else in the world. After that he was a changed person. He went dreaming about, thinking only of his fairy, and caring for naught else in the world. The old Count saw with affliction this changement in his son, whose cause he could not divine, and tried to divert his mind into cheerful channels, but to no purpose. Then the old Count used authority. He commanded the youth to betake himself to the camp. Obedience was promised. Garnham says, "It was on the evening before his departure, as he wished still once to visit the Ley, and offer to the nymph of the Rhine his sighs, the tones of his zither, and his songs. He went in his boat, this time accompanied by a faithful squire, down the stream. The moon shed her silvery light over the whole country. The steep bank mountains appeared in the most fantastical shapes, and the high oaks on either side bowed their branches on Hermann's passing. As soon as he approached the Ley and was aware of the surf waves, his attendant was seized with an inexpressible anxiety, and he begged permission to land. But the knight swept the strings of his guitar and sang, "Once I saw thee in dark night, in supernatural beauty bright. Of light rays was the figure wove, to share its light, locked hair strove. Thy garment color wave dove, by thy hand the sign of love. Thy eyes sweet enchantment, raying to me, oh, entrancement! Oh, wert thou but my sweetheart, how willingly thy love to part! With delight I should be bound to thy rocky house in deep ground." That Hermann should have gone to that place at all was not wise. That he should have gone with such a song as that in his mouth was a most serious mistake. The Lorelei did not call his name in unutterable sweet whispers this time. No, that song naturally worked an instant and thorough changement in her. And not only that, but it stirred the bowels of the whole afflicted region round about there, for scarcely had these tones sounded, everywhere there began tumult and sound, as if voices above and below the water. On the Lie rose flames. The fairy stood above, as that time, and beckoned with her right hand clearly and urgently to the infatuated knight, while with a staff in her left she called the waves to her service. They began to mount heavenward. The boat was upset, mocking every exertion. The waves rose to the gunwale, and splitting on the hard stones, the boat broke into pieces. The youth sank into the depths, but the squire was thrown on shore by a powerful wave. The bitterest things have been said about the Lorelei during many centuries, but surely her conduct upon this occasion entitles her to our respect. One feels tenderly toward her, and is moved to forget her many crimes and remember only the good deed that crowned and closed her career. The fairy was never more seen, but her enchanting tones have often been heard in the beautiful, refreshing, still nights of spring, when the moon pours her silver light over the country. The listening shipper hears from the rushing of the waves the echoing clang of a wonderfully charming voice, which sings a song from the crystal castle, and with sorrow and fear he thinks on the young Count Hermann, seduced by the nymph. Here is the music and the German words by Heinrich Heine. This song has been a favorite in Germany for 40 years, and will remain a favorite always, maybe. Ich weiß nicht, was soll es bedeuten, dass ich so traurig bin. Ein Märchen aus alten Zeiten, das kommt mir nicht aus dem Sinn. Die Luft ist kühl und es dunkelt und ruhig fließt der Rhein. Der Gipfel des Berges funkelt im Abendsonnenschein. Die schönste Jungfrau sitzet dort oben wunderbar. Ihr goldnes Geschmiede blitzet, sie kämmt ihr goldenes Haar. Sie kämmt es mit goldenem Kamme und singt ein Lied dabei. Das hat eine wundersame, gewaltige Melodie. Den Schiffer im kleinen Schiffe ergreift es mit wildem Weh. Schaut nicht die Felsenriffe, schaut nur hinauf in die Höhe. Ich glaube, die Wellen verschlingen am Ende Schiffer und Kahn. Und das hat mit ihrem Singen die Lorelei getan. I have a prejudice against people who print things in a foreign language and add no translation. When I am the reader and the author considers me able to do the translating myself, he pays me quite a nice compliment. But if he would do the translating for me, I would try to get along without the compliment. If I were at home, no doubt I could get a translation of this poem, but I am abroad and can't. Therefore, I will make a translation myself. It may not be a good one, for poetry is out of my line, but it will serve my purpose, which is to give the un-German young girl a jingle of words to hang the tune on, until she can get hold of a good version made by some who is a poet and knows how to convey a poetical thought from one language to another. The Lorelei. I cannot divine what it meaneth, this haunting nameless pain. A tale of the bygone ages keeps brooding through my brain. The faint air cools in the gloaming, and peaceful flows the Rhine. The thirsty summits are drinking the sunset's flooding wine. The loveliest maiden is sitting high-throned in yon blue air. Her golden jewels are shining. She combs her golden hair. She combs with a comb that is golden, and sings a weird refrain that steeps in a deadly enchantment the listener's ravished brain. The doomed in his drifting shallop is tranced with the sad sweet tone. He sees not the yawning breakers, he sees but the maid alone. The pitiless billows engulf him, so perish sailor and bark. And this, with her baleful singing, is the Lorelei's gruesome work. I have a translation by Garnham, Bachelor of Arts, in The Legends of the Rhine, but it would not answer the purpose I mentioned above, because the measure is too nobly irregular. It doesn't fit the tune snugly enough. In places it hangs over at the ends too far, and in other places one runs out of words before he gets to the end of a bar. Still, Garnham's translation has high merits, and I am not dreaming of leaving it out of my book. I believe this poet is wholly unknown in America and England. I take peculiar pleasure in bringing him forward because I consider that I discovered him. The Lorelei, translated by L. W. Garnham, B.A. I do not know what it signifies that I am so sorrowful. A fable of old times so terrifies, leaves my heart so thoughtful. The air is cool, and it darkens, and calmly flows the Rhine. The summit of the mountain hearkens in evening sunshine line. The most beautiful maiden entrances, above wonderfully there. Her beautiful golden attire glances, she combs her golden hair. With golden comb so lustrous, and thereby a song sings. It has a tone so wondrous that powerful melody rings. The shipper in the little ship it affects with woe's sad might. He does not see the rocky clip, he only regards dreaded height. I believe the turbulent waves swallow at last shipper and boat. She with her singing craves all to visit her magic moat. No translation could be closer. He has got in all the facts, and in their regular order, too. There is not a statistic wanting. It is as succinct as an invoice. That is what a translation ought to be. It should exactly reflect the thought of the original. You can't sing above wonderfully there, because it simply won't go to the tune without damaging the singer. But it is a most clingingly exact translation of Dort oben wunderbar. Fits it like a blister. Mr. Garnham's reproduction has other merits, 100 of them, but it is not necessary to point them out. They will be detected. No one with a specialty can hope to have a monopoly of it. Even Garnham has a rival. Mr. X had a small pamphlet with him, which he had bought while on a visit to Munich. It was entitled A Catalogue of Pictures in the Old Pinakothek, and was written in a peculiar kind of English. Here are a few extracts. It is not permitted to make use of the work in question to a publication of the same contents, as well as to the pirated edition of it. An evening landscape. In the foreground, near a pond and a group of white beeches, is leading a footpath animated by travelers. A learned man in a cynical and torn dress, holding an open book in his hand. Saint Bartholomew and the executioner with the knight to fulfill the martyr. Portrait of a young man. A long while this picture was thought to be Bindi Altoviti's portrait. Now somebody will again have it to be the self-portrait of Raphael. Susan, bathing, surprised by the two old men. In the background, the lapidation of the condemned. Lapidation is good. It is much more elegant than stoning. Saint Rochus, sitting in a landscape with an angel who looks at his plague sore, while the dog, the bread in his mouth, attents him. Spring, the goddess Flora, sitting, behind her a fertile valley perfused by a river. A beautiful bouquet animated by maybugs, etc. A warrior in armor with a gypseous pipe in his hand leans against a table and blows the smoke far away of himself. A Dutch landscape along a navigable river which perfuses it till to the background. Some peasants singing in a cottage. A woman lets drink a child out of a cup. St. John's head as a boy, painted in fresco on a brick, meaning a tile. A young man of the Riccio family, his hair cut off right at the end, dressed in black with the same cap, attributed to Raphael, but the signation is false. The Virgin holding the infant is very painted in the manner of Sassoferrato. A larder with greens and dead game, animated by a cookmaid and two kitchen boys. However, the English of this catalogue is at least as happy as that which distinguishes an inscription upon a certain picture in Rome, to wit, Revelations View, St. John in Patterson's Island. But meantime, the raft is moving on. Chapter 17. A mile or two above Eberbach, we saw a peculiar ruin projecting above the foliage, which clothed the peak of a high and very steep hill. This ruin consisted of merely a couple of crumbling masses of masonry, which bore a rude resemblance to human faces. They leaned forward and touched foreheads, and had the look of being absorbed in conversation. This ruin had nothing very imposing or picturesque about it, and there was no great deal of it, yet it was called the Spectacular Ruin. Legend of the Spectacular Ruin. The captain of the raft, who was as full of history as he could stick, said that in the Middle Ages a most prodigious fire-breathing dragon used to live in that region, and made more trouble than a tax collector. He was as long as a railway train, and had the customary impenetrable green scales all over him. His breath bred pestilence and conflagration, and his appetite bred famine. He ate men and cattle impartially, and was exceedingly unpopular. The German emperor of that day made the usual offer. He would grant to the destroyer of the dragon any one solitary thing he might ask for he had a surplusage of daughters, and it was customary for dragon killers to take a daughter for pay. So the most renowned knights came from the four corners of the earth and retired down the dragon's throat one after the other. A panic arose and spread. Heroes grew cautious. The procession ceased. The dragon became more destructive than ever. The people lost all hope of succor and fled to the mountains for refuge. At last Sir Wissenschaft, a poor and obscure knight, out of a far country, arrived to do battle with the monster. A pitiable object he was, with his armor hanging in rags about him, and his strange-shaped knapsack strapped upon his back. Everybody turned up their noses at him, and some openly jeered him. But he was calm. He simply inquired if the emperor's offer was still in force. The emperor said it was, but charitably advised him to go and hunt hares and not endanger so precious a life as his in an attempt which had brought death to so many of the world's most illustrious heroes. But this tramp only asked, were any of these heroes men of science? This raised a laugh, of course, for science was despised in those days. But the tramp was not in the least ruffled. He said he might be a little in advance of his age, but no matter. Science would come to be honored some time or other. He said he would march against the dragon in the morning. Out of compassion, then, a decent spear was offered him, but he declined and said spears were useless to men of science. They allowed him to sup in the servants' hall and gave him a bed in the stables. When he started forth in the morning, thousands were gathered to see. The emperor said, "Do not be rash. Take a spear and leave off your knapsack." But the tramp said, "It is not a knapsack," and moved straight on. The dragon was waiting and ready. He was breathing forth vast volumes of sulphurous smoke and lurid blasts of flame. The ragged knight stole warily to a good position. Then he unslung his cylindrical knapsack, which was simply the common fire extinguisher known to modern times, and the first chance he got, he turned on his hose and shot the dragon square in the center of his cavernous mouth. Out went the fires in an instant, and the dragon curled up and died. This man had brought brains to his aid. He had reared dragons from the egg in his laboratory. He had watched over them like a mother, and patiently studied them and experimented upon them while they grew. Thus he had found out that fire was the life principle of a dragon. Put out the dragon's fires, and it could make steam no longer, and must die. He could not put out a fire with a spear, therefore he invented the extinguisher. The dragon being dead, the emperor fell on the hero's neck and said, "Deliverer, name your request," at the same time beckoning out behind with his heel for a detachment of his daughters to form and advance. But the tramp gave them no observance. He simply said, "My request is that upon me be conferred the monopoly of the manufacture and sale of spectacles in Germany." The emperor sprang aside and exclaimed, "This transcends all the impudence I ever heard. A modest demand, by my halidome! Why didn't you ask for the imperial revenues at once and be done with it?" But the monarch had given his word, and he kept it. To everybody's surprise, the unselfish monopolist immediately reduced the price of spectacles to such a degree that a great and crushing burden was removed from the nation. The emperor, to commemorate this generous act, and to testify his appreciation of it, issued a decree commanding everybody to buy this benefactor's spectacles and wear them, whether they needed them or not. So originated the widespread custom of wearing spectacles in Germany, and as a custom once established in these old lands is imperishable, this one remains universal in the empire to this day. Such is the legend of the monopolist's once stately and sumptuous castle, now called the Spectacular Ruin. On the right bank, 2 or 3 miles below the Spectacular Ruin, we passed by a noble pile of castellated buildings overlooking the water from the crest of a lofty elevation. A stretch of 200 yards of the high front wall was heavily draped with ivy, and out of the mass of buildings within rose 3 picturesque old towers. The place was in fine order, and was inhabited by a family of princely rank. This castle had its legend, too, but I should not feel justified in repeating it because I doubted the truth of some of its minor details. Along in this region, a multitude of Italian laborers were blasting away the frontage of the hills to make room for the new railway. They were 50 or 100 feet above the river. As we turned a sharp corner, they began to wave signals and shout warnings to us to look out for the explosions. It was all very well to warn us, but what could we do? You can't back a raft upstream. You can't hurry it downstream. You can't scatter out to one side when you haven't any room to speak of. You won't take to the perpendicular cliffs on the other shore when they appear to be blasting there, too. Your resources are limited, you see. There is simply nothing for it but to watch and pray. For some hours we had been making 3.5 or 4 miles an hour, and we were still making that. We had been dancing right along until these men began to shout. Then for the next 10 minutes it seemed to me that I had never seen a raft go so slowly. When the first blast went off, we raised our sun umbrellas and waited for the result. No harm done. None of the stones fell in the water. Another blast followed, and another, and another. Some of the rubbish fell in the water just astern of us. We ran that whole battery of 9 blasts in a row, and it was certainly one of the most exciting and uncomfortable weeks I ever spent either aship or ashore. Of course, we frequently manned the poles and shoved earnestly for a second or so, but every time one of those spurts of dust and debris shot aloft, every man dropped his pole and looked up to get the bearings of his share of it. It was very busy times along there for a while. It appeared certain that we must perish. But even that was not the bitterest thought. No, the abjectly unheroic nature of the death, that was the sting, that and the bizarre wording of the resulting obituary, shot with a rock on a raft. There would be no poetry written about it. None could be written about it. Example: not by war's shock or war's shaft, shot with a rock on a raft. No poet who valued his reputation would touch such a theme as that. I should be distinguished as the only distinguished dead who went down to the grave unsonneted in 1878. But we escaped, and I have never regretted it. The last blast was a peculiarly strong one, and after the small rubbish was done raining around us, and we were just going to shake hands over our deliverance, a later and larger stone came down amongst our little group of pedestrians and wrecked an umbrella. It did no other harm, but we took to the water just the same. It seems that the heavy work in the quarries and the new railway gratings is done mainly by Italians. That was a revelation. We have the notion in our country that Italians never do heavy work at all, but confine themselves to the lighter arts like organ grinding, operatic singing, and assassination. We have blundered, that is plain. All along the river, near every village, we saw little station houses for the future railway. They were finished and waiting for the rails and business. They were as trim and snug and pretty as they could be. They were always of brick or stone. They were of graceful shape. They had vines and flowers about them already, and around them the grass was bright and green and showed that it was carefully looked after. They were a decoration to the beautiful landscape, not an offense. Wherever one saw a pile of gravel or a pile of broken stone, it was always heaped as trimly and exactly as a new grave or a stack of cannonballs. Nothing about those stations or along the railroad or the wagon road was allowed to look shabby or be unornamental. The keeping a country in such beautiful order as Germany exhibits has a wise, practical side to it, for it keeps thousands of people in work and bread who would otherwise be idle and mischievous. As the night shut down, the captain wanted to tie up, but I thought maybe we might make Hirschhorn, so we went on. Presently the sky became overcast, and the captain came aft, looking uneasy. He cast his eye aloft, then shook his head, and said it was coming on to blow. My party wanted to land at once. Therefore, I wanted to go on. The captain said we ought to shorten sail anyway, out of common prudence. Consequently, the larboard watch was ordered to lay in his pole. It grew quite dark now, and the wind began to rise. It wailed through the swaying branches of the trees and swept our decks in fitful gusts. Things were taking on an ugly look. The captain shouted to the steersman on the forward log, "How's she heading?" The answer came faint and hoarse from far forward. "Nor'east and by nor'. East by east, half east, sir." "Let her go off a point." "Aye, aye, sir." "What water have you got?" "Shoal, sir, 2 foot large on the starboard, 2 1/2 scant on the larboard." "Let her go off another point." "Aye, aye, sir." "Forward, men, all of you, lively now. Stand by to crowd her round the weather corner." "Aye, aye, sir." Then followed a wild running and trampling and hoarse shouting, but the forms of the men were lost in the darkness, and the sounds were distorted and confused by the roaring of the wind through the shingle bundles. By this time the sea was running inches high, and threatening every moment to engulf the frail bark. Now came the mate hurrying aft and said, close to the captain's ear, in a low, agitated voice, "Prepare for the worst, sir. We have sprung a leak." "Heavens! Where?" "Right aft the second row of logs." "Nothing but a miracle can save us. Don't let the men know, or there will be a panic and mutiny. Lay her inshore and stand by to jump with the stern line the moment she touches. Gentlemen, I must look to you to second my endeavors in this hour of peril. You have hats? Go for'ard and bail for your lives." Down swept another mighty blast of wind, clothed in spray and thick darkness. At such a moment as this came from away forward that most appalling of all cries that are ever heard at sea. "Man overboard!" The captain shouted. "Hard a port! Never mind the man! Let him climb aboard or wade ashore!" Another cry came down the wind. "Breakers ahead!" "Where away?" "Not a log's length off her port forefoot." We had groped our slippery way forward, and were now bailing with the frenzy of despair, when we heard the mate's terrified cry from far aft, "Stop that dashed bailing, or we shall be aground!" But this was immediately followed by the glad shout, "Land aboard the starboard transom!" "Saved!" cried the captain. "Jump ashore and take a turn around a tree and pass the bight aboard." The next moment we were all on shore, weeping and embracing for joy, while the rain poured down in torrents. The captain said he had been a mariner for 40 years on the Neckar, and in that time he had seen storms to make a man's cheek blanch and his pulses stop, but he had never seen a storm that even approached this one. How familiar that sounded, for I have been at sea a good deal, and have heard that remark from captains with a frequency accordingly. We framed in our minds the usual resolution of thanks and admiration and gratitude, and took the first opportunity to vote it, and put it in writing and present it to the captain with the customary speech. We tramped through the darkness and the drenching summer rain full 3 miles and reached the Naturalist Tavern in the village of Hirschhorn, just an hour before midnight. Almost exhausted from hardship, fatigue, and terror, I can never forget that night. The landlord was rich, and therefore could afford to be crusty and disobliging. He did not at all like being turned out of his warm bed to open his house for us, but no matter. His household got up and cooked a quick supper for us, and we brewed a hot punch for ourselves to keep off consumption. After supper and punch, we had an hour's soothing smoke while we fought the naval battle over again. and voted the resolutions. Then we retired to exceedingly neat and pretty chambers upstairs that had clean, comfortable beds in them, with heirloom pillow-cases, most elaborately and tastefully embroidered by hand. Such rooms and beds and embroidered linen are as frequent in German village inns as they are rare in ours. Our villages are superior to German villages in more merits, excellences, conveniences, and privileges than I can enumerate, but the hotels do not belong in the list. The Naturalist Tavern was not a meaningless name, for all the halls and all the rooms were lined with large glass cases which were filled with all sorts of birds and animals, glass-eyed, ably stuffed, and set up in the most natural and eloquent and dramatic attitudes. The moment we were abed, the rain cleared away, and the moon came out. I dozed off to sleep while contemplating a great white stuffed owl which was looking intently down on me from a high perch, with the air of a person who thought he had met me before, but could not make out for certain. But young Z did not get off so easily. He said that as he was sinking deliciously to sleep, the moon lifted away the shadows and developed a huge cat on a bracket, dead and stuffed, but crouching with every muscle tense for a spring, and with its glittering eyes aimed straight at him. It made Z uncomfortable. He tried closing his own eyes, but that did not answer, for a natural instinct kept making him open them again to see if the cat was still getting ready to launch at him, which she always was. He tried turning his back, but that was a failure. He knew the sinister eyes were on him still, so at last he had to get up, after an hour or two of worry and experiment, and set the cat out in the hall. So he won that time. Chapter 18. In the morning we took breakfast in the garden under the trees, in the delightful German summer fashion. The air was filled with the fragrance of flowers and wild animals. The living portion of the menagerie of the Naturalist Tavern was all about us. There were great cages, populous with fluttering and chattering foreign birds, and other great cages and greater wire pens, populous with quadrupeds, both native and foreign. There were some free creatures, too, and quite sociable ones they were. White rabbits went loping about the place, and occasionally came and sniffed at our shoes and shins. A fawn with a red ribbon on its neck walked up and examined us fearlessly. Rare breeds of chickens and doves begged for crumbs, and a poor old tailless raven hopped about with an humble, shamefaced mien which said, "Please do not notice my exposure. Think how you would feel in my circumstances, and be charitable." If he was observed too much, he would retire behind something and stay there until he judged the party's interest had found another object. I never have seen another dumb creature that was so morbidly sensitive. Bayard Taylor, who could interpret the dim reasonings of animals and understood their moral natures better than most men, would have found some way to make this poor old chap forget his troubles for a while, but we had not his kindly art, and so had to leave the raven to his griefs. After breakfast we climbed the hill and visited the ancient castle of Hirschhorn, and the ruined church near it. There were some curious old bas-reliefs leaning against the inner walls of the church, sculptured lords of Hirschhorn in complete armor, and ladies of Hirschhorn in the picturesque court costumes of the Middle Ages. These things are suffering damage and passing to decay, for the last Hirschhorn has been dead for 200 years, and there is nobody now who cares to preserve the family relics. In the chancel was a twisted stone column, and the captain told us a legend about it, of course, for in the matter of legends he could not seem to restrain himself. but I do not repeat his tale because there was nothing plausible about it, except that the hero wrenched this column into its present screw shape with his hands, just one single wrench. All the rest of the legend was doubtful. But Hirschhorn is best seen from a distance down the river. Then the clustered brown towers perched on the green hilltop, and the old battlemented stone wall stretching up and over the grassy ridge and disappearing in the leafy sea beyond, make a picture whose grace and beauty entirely satisfy the eye. We descended from the church by steep stone stairways which curved this way and that down narrow alleys between the packed and dirty tenements of the village. It was a quarter well stocked with deformed, leering, unkempt and uncombed idiots who held out hands or caps and begged piteously. The people of the quarter were not all idiots, of course, but all that begged seemed to be, and were said to be. I was thinking of going by skiff to the next town, Neckarsteinach, so I ran to the riverside in advance of the party and asked a man there if he had a boat to hire. I suppose I must have spoken High German, Court German. I intended it for that anyway, so he did not understand me. I turned and twisted my question around and around, trying to strike that man's average, but failed. He could not make out what I wanted. Now Mr. X arrived, faced this same man, looked him in the eye, and emptied this sentence on him in the most glib and confident way: "Can man boat get here?" The mariner promptly understood and promptly answered. I can comprehend why he was able to understand that particular sentence, because by mere accident all the words in it except get have the same sound and the same meaning in German that they have in English. But how he managed to understand Mr. X's next remark puzzled me. I will insert it presently. X turned away a moment, and I asked the mariner if he could not find a board, and so construct an additional seat. I spoke in the purest German, but I might as well have spoken in the purest Choctaw for all the good it did. The man tried his best to understand me. He tried and kept on trying, harder and harder, until I saw it was really of no use, and said, "There, don't strain yourself, it is of no consequence." Then X turned to him and crisply said, "Machen Sie a flat board." I wish my epitaph may tell the truth about me if the man did not answer up at once and say he would go and borrow a board as soon as he had lit the pipe which he was filling. We changed our mind about taking a boat, so we did not have to go. I have given Mr. X's two remarks just as he made them. 4 of the 5 words in the first one were English, and that they were also German was only accidental, not intentional. 3 out of the 5 words in the second remark were English, and English only, and the 2 German ones did not mean anything in particular in such a connection. X always spoke English to Germans, but his plan was to turn the sentence wrong end first and upside down, according to German construction, and sprinkle in a German word without any essential meaning to it here and there by way of flavor. Yet he always made himself understood. He could make those dialect-speaking raftsmen understand him sometimes, when even young Z had failed with them, and young Z was a pretty good German scholar. For one thing, X always spoke with such confidence. Perhaps that helped. And possibly the raftsman's dialect was what is called Plattdeutsch, and so they found his English more familiar to their ears than another man's German. Quite indifferent students of German can read Fritz Reuter's charming Plattdeutsch tales with some little facility, because many of the words are English. I suppose this is the tongue which our Saxon ancestors carried to England with them. By and by I will inquire of some other philologist. However, in the meantime, it had transpired that the men employed to caulk the raft had found that the leak was not a leak at all, but only a crack between the logs. a crack which belonged there and was not dangerous, but had been magnified into a leak by the disordered imagination of the mate. Therefore we went aboard again with a good degree of confidence, and presently got to sea without accident. As we swam smoothly along between the enchanting shores, we fell to swapping notes about manners and customs in Germany and elsewhere. As we swam smoothly along between the enchanting shores, we fell to swapping notes about manners and customs in Germany and elsewhere. As I write now, many months later, I perceive that each of us, by observing and noting and inquiring diligently and day by day, had managed to lay in a most varied and opulent stock of misinformation. But this is not surprising. It is very difficult to get accurate details in any country. For example, I had the idea once in Heidelberg to find out all about those 5 student corps. I started with the White Cap Corps. I began to inquire of this and that in the other citizens, and here is what I found out. 1. It is called the Prussian Corps because none but Prussians are admitted to it. 2. It is called the Prussian Corps for no particular reason. It has simply pleased each corps to name itself after some German state. C. It is not named the Prussian Corps at all, but only the White Cap Corps. 4. Any student can belong to it who is a German by birth. 5. Any student can belong to it who is European by birth. 6. Any European-born student can belong to it except he be a Frenchman. 7. Any student can belong to it no matter where he was born. 8. No student can belong to it who is not of noble blood. 9. No student can belong to it who cannot show 3 full generations of noble descent. 10. Nobility is not a necessary qualification. 11. No moneyless student can belong to it. 12. Money qualification is nonsense. Such a thing has never been thought of. I got some of this information from the students themselves, students who did not belong to the Corps. I finally went to headquarters, to the Whitecaps, where I would have gone in the first place if I had been acquainted. But even at headquarters I found difficulties. I perceived that there were things about the White Cap Corps which one member knew and another one didn't. It was natural, for very few members of any organization know all that can be known about it. I doubt if there is a man or a woman in Heidelberg who would not answer promptly and confidently 3 out of every 5 questions about the White Cap Corps which a stranger might ask. Yet it is a very safe bet that 2 of the 3 answers would be incorrect every time. There is one German custom which is universal, the bowing courteously to strangers when sitting down at table or rising up from it. This bow startles a stranger out of his self-possession the first time it occurs, and he is likely to fall over a chair or something in his embarrassment, but it pleases him nevertheless. One soon learns to expect this bow and be on the lookout and ready to return it. But to learn to lead off and make the initial bow oneself is a difficult matter for a diffident man. One thinks, if I rise to go and tender my bow, and these ladies and gentlemen take it into their heads to ignore the custom of their nation and not return it, how shall I feel in case I survive to feel anything? Therefore, he is afraid to venture. He sits out to the dinner and makes the strangers rise first and originate the bowing. A table d'hôte dinner is a tedious affair for a man who seldom touches anything after the first 3 courses. Therefore, I used to do some pretty dreary waiting because of my fears. It took me months to assure myself that those fears were groundless, but I did assure myself at last by experimenting diligently through my agent. I made Harris get up and bow and leave. Invariably, his bow was returned. Then I got up and bowed myself and retired. Thus my education proceeded easily and comfortably for me, but not for Harris. 3 courses of a table d'hôte dinner were enough for me, but Harris preferred 13. Even after I had acquired full confidence and no longer needed the agent's help, I sometimes encountered difficulties. Once at Baden-Baden, I nearly lost a train because I could not be sure that 3 young ladies opposite me at table were Germans, since I had not heard them speak. They might be American, they might be English. It was not safe to venture a bow. But just as I had got that far with my thought, one of them began a German remark, to my great relief and gratitude, and before she had got out her 3rd word, our bows had been delivered and graciously returned, and we were off. There is a friendly something about the German character which is very winning. When Harris and I were making a pedestrian tour through the Black Forest, we stopped at a little country inn for dinner one day. 2 young ladies and a young gentleman entered and sat down opposite us. They were pedestrians, too. Our knapsacks were strapped upon our backs, but they had a sturdy youth along to carry theirs for them. All parties were hungry, so there was no talking. By the by, the usual bows were exchanged, and we separated. As we sat at a late breakfast in the hotel at Allerheiligen next morning, these young people entered and took places near us without observing us. But presently they saw us, and at once bowed and smiled, not ceremoniously, but with the gratified look of people who have found acquaintances where they were expecting strangers. Then they spoke of the weather and the roads. We also spoke of the weather and the roads. Next they said they had had an enjoyable walk, notwithstanding the weather. We said that had been our case, too. Then they said they had walked 30 English miles the day before, and asked how many we had walked. I could not lie, so I told Harris to do it. Harris told them we had made 30 English miles, too. That was true. We had made them, though we had had a little assistance here and there. After breakfast, they found us trying to blast some information out of the dumb hotel clerk about routes, and observing that we were not succeeding pretty well, they went and got their maps and things and pointed out and explained our course so clearly that even a New York detective could have followed it. And when we started, they spoke out a hearty goodbye and wished us a pleasant journey. Perhaps they were more generous with us than they might have been with native wayfarers, because we were a forlorn lot and in a strange land. I don't know. I only know it was lovely to be treated so. Very well, I took an American young lady to one of the fine balls in Baden-Baden one night, and at the entrance door upstairs we were halted by an official. Something about Miss Jones's dress was not according to rule. I don't remember what it was now. Something was wanting. Her back hair, or a shawl, or a fan, or a shovel, or something. The official was ever so polite and ever so sorry, but the rule was strict, and he could not let us in. It was very embarrassing, for many eyes were on us. But now a richly dressed girl stepped out of the ballroom, inquired into our trouble, and said she could fix it in a moment. She took Miss Jones to the robing room, and soon brought her back in regulation trim, and then we entered the ballroom with this benefactress unchallenged. Being safe now, I began to puzzle through my sincere but ungrammatical thanks, when there was a sudden mutual recognition. The benefactress and I had met at Allerheiligen. 2 weeks had not altered her good face, and plainly her heart was in the right place yet. But there was such a difference between these clothes and the clothes I had seen her in before, when she was walking 30 miles a day in the Black Forest, that it was quite natural that I had failed to recognize her sooner. I had on my other suit, too, but my German would betray me to a person who had heard it once anyway. She brought her brother and sister, and they made our way smooth for that evening. Well, months afterwards, I was driving through the streets of Munich in a cab with a German lady one day, when she said,
There, that is Prince Ludwig and his wife walking along there." Everybody was bowing to them, cabmen, little children, and everybody else, and they were returning all the bows and overlooking nobody, when a young lady met them and made a deep curtsy. "That is probably one of the ladies of the court," said my German friend. I said, "She is an honor to it, then. I know her. I don't know her name, but I know her. I have known her at Allerheiligen and Baden-Baden. She ought to be an empress, but she may be only a duchess. It is the way things go in this world." If one asks a German a civil question, he will be quite sure to get a civil answer. If you stop a German in the street and ask him to direct you to a certain place, he shows no sign of feeling offended. If the place be difficult to find, 10 to 1 the man will drop his own matters and go with you and show you. In London, too, many a time strangers have walked several blocks with me to show me the way. There is something very real about this sort of politeness. Quite often in Germany, shopkeepers who could not furnish me the article I wanted have sent one of their employees with me to show me a place where it could be had. Chapter 19. However, I wander from the raft. We made the port of Neckarsteinach in good season, and went to the hotel and ordered a trout dinner, the same to be ready against our return from a 2-hour pedestrian excursion to the village and castle of Dilsberg, a mile distant, on the other side of the river. I do not mean that we proposed to be 2 hours making 2 miles. No, we meant to employ most of the time in inspecting Dilsberg. For Dilsberg is a quaint place. It is most quaintly and picturesquely situated, too. Imagine the beautiful river before you, then a few rods of brilliant green sward on its opposite shore, then a sudden hill, no preparatory gently rising slopes, but a sort of instantaneous hill, a hill 250 or 300 feet high, as round as a bowl, with the same taper upward that an inverted bowl has, and with about the same relation of height to diameter that distinguishes a bowl of good honest depth, a hill which is thickly clothed with green bushes, a comely, shapely hill, rising abruptly out of the dead level of the surrounding green plains, visible from a great distance down the bends of the river, and with just exactly room on the top of its head for its steepled and turreted and roof-clustered cap of architecture, which same is tightly jammed and compacted within the perfectly round hoop of the ancient village wall. There is no house outside the wall on the whole hill, or any vestige of a former house. All the houses are inside the wall, but there isn't room for another one. It is really a finished town, and has been finished a very long time. There is no space between the wall and the first circle of buildings. No, the village wall is itself the rear wall of the first circle of buildings, and the roofs jut a little over the wall and thus furnish it with eaves. The general level of the massed roofs is gracefully broken and relieved by the dominating towers of the ruined castle and the tall spires of a couple of churches. So, from a distance, Dilsberg has rather more the look of a king's crown than a cap. That lofty green eminence and its quaint coronet form quite a striking picture, you may be sure, in the flush of the evening sun. We crossed over in a boat and began the ascent by a narrow, steep path which plunged us at once into the leafy deeps of the bushes. But they were not cool deeps by any means, for the sun's rays were weltering hot, and there was little or no breeze to temper them. As we panted up the sharp ascent, we met brown, bare-headed, and barefooted boys and girls occasionally, and sometimes men. They came upon us without warning. They gave us good day, flashed out of sight in the bushes, and were gone as suddenly and mysteriously as they had come. They were bound for the other side of the river to work. This path had been traveled by many generations of these people. They have always gone down to the valley to earn their bread, but they have always climbed their hill again to eat it and to sleep in their snug town. It is said that the Dilsbergers do not emigrate much. They find that living up there above the world in their peaceful nest is pleasanter than living down in the troublous world. The 700 inhabitants are all blood kin to each other, too. They have always been blood kin to each other for 1,500 years. They are simply one large family, and they like the home folks better than they like strangers. Hence, they persistently stay at home. It has been said that for ages Dilsberg has been merely a thriving and diligent idiot factory. I saw no idiots there, but the captain said, because of late years, the government has taken to lugging them off to asylums and other wheres, and government wants to cripple the factory, too, and is trying to get these Dilsbergers to marry out of the family. But they don't like to. The captain probably imagined all this, as modern science denies that the intermarrying of relatives deteriorates the stock. Arrived within the wall, we found the usual village sights and life. We moved along a narrow, crooked lane which had been paved in the Middle Ages. A strapping, ruddy girl was beating flax, or some such stuff, in a little bit of a goods box of a barn, and she swung her flail with a will, if it was a flail. I was not farmer enough to know what she was at. A frowsy, bare-legged girl was herding 6 geese with a stick, driving them along the lane and keeping them out of the dwellings. A cooper was at work in a shop which I know he did not make so large a thing as a hogshead in, for there was not room. In the front rooms of dwellings, girls and women were cooking or spinning, and ducks and chickens were waddling in and out over the threshold, picking up chance crumbs and holding pleasant converse. A very old and wrinkled man sat asleep before his door, with his chin upon his breast, and his extinguished pipe in his lap. Soiled children were playing in the dirt everywhere along the lane, unmindful of the sun. Except the sleeping old man, everybody was at work, but the place was very still and peaceful nevertheless. So still that the distant cackle of the successful hen smote upon the ear, but little dulled by intervening sounds. That commonest of village sights was lacking here, the public pump, with its great stone tank or trough of limpid water, and its group of gossiping pitcher-bearers, for there is no well or fountain or spring on this tall hill. Cisterns of rain-water are used. Our alpenstocks and muslin tails compelled attention, and as we moved through the village, we gathered a considerable procession of little boys and girls, and so went in some state to the castle. It proved to be an extensive pile of crumbling walls, arches, and towers, massive, properly grouped for picturesque effect, weedy, grass-grown, and satisfactory. The children acted as guides. They walked us along the top of the highest wall, then took us up into a high tower and showed us a wide and beautiful landscape made up of wavy distances of woody hills, and a nearer prospect of undulating expanses of green lowlands on the one hand, and castle-graced crags and ridges on the other, with the shining curves of the Neckar flowing between. But the principal show, the chief pride of the children, was the ancient and empty well in the grass-grown court of the castle. Its massive stone curb stands up 3 or 4 feet above ground, and is whole and uninjured. The children said that in the Middle Ages this well was 400 feet deep, and furnished all the village with an abundant supply of water in war and peace. They said that in that old day its bottom was below the level of the Neckar, hence the water supply was inexhaustible. But there were some who believed it had never been a well at all. and was never deeper than it is now, 80 feet. That at that depth a subterranean passage branched from it and descended gradually to a remote place in the valley, where it opened into somebody's cellar or other hidden recess, and that the secret of this locality is now lost. Those who hold this belief say that herein lies the explanation that Dilsberg, besieged by Tilly and many a soldier before him, was never taken. After the longest and closest sieges, the besiegers were astonished to perceive that the besieged were as fat and hearty as ever, and as well furnished with munitions of war. Therefore it must be that the Dilsbergers had been bringing these things in through the subterranean passage all the time. The children said that there was in truth a subterranean outlet down there, and they would prove it. So they set a great truss of straw on fire and threw it down the well, while we leaned on the curb and watched the glowing mass descend. It struck bottom and gradually burned out. No smoke came up. The children clapped their hands and said, "You see, nothing makes so much smoke as burning straw. Now where did the smoke go to if there is no subterranean outlet?" So it seemed quite evident that the subterranean outlet indeed existed, but the finest thing within the ruins' limits was a noble linden, which the children said was 400 years old, and no doubt it was. It had a mighty trunk and a mighty spread of limb and foliage. The limbs near the ground were nearly the thickness of a barrel. That tree had witnessed the assaults of men in mail. How remote such a time seems, and how ungraspable is the fact that real men ever did fight in real armor, and it had seen the time when these broken arches and crumbling battlements were a trim and strong and stately fortress, fluttering its gay banners in the sun, and peopled with vigorous humanity. How impossibly long ago that seems. And here it stands yet, and possibly may still be standing here, sunning itself and dreaming its historical dreams, when today shall have been joined to the days called ancient. Well, we sat down under the tree to smoke, and the captain delivered himself of his legend. The Legend of Dilsberg Castle. It was to this effect: in the old time there was once a great company assembled at the castle, and festivity ran high. Of course there was a haunted chamber in the castle, and one day the talk fell upon that. It was said that whoever slept in it would not wake again for 50 years. Now, when a young knight named Conrad von Geisberg heard this, he said that if the castle were his, he would destroy that chamber, so that no foolish person might have the chance to bring so dreadful a misfortune upon himself, and afflict such as loved him with the memory of it. Straightway the company privately laid their heads together to contrive some way to get this superstitious young man to sleep in that chamber, and they succeeded in this way. They persuaded his betrothed, a lovely, mischievous young creature, niece of the lord of the castle, to help them in their plot. She presently took him aside and had speech with him. She used all her persuasions, but could not shake him. He said his belief was firm, that if he should sleep there, he would wake no more for 50 years, and it made him shudder to think of it. Katerina began to weep. This was a better argument. Conrad could not hold out against it. He yielded and said she should have her wish if she would only smile and be happy again. She flung her arms about his neck, and the kisses she gave him showed that her thankfulness and her pleasure were very real. Then she flew to tell the company her success, and the applause she received made her glad and proud she had undertaken her mission, since all alone she had accomplished what the multitude had failed in. At midnight that night, after the usual feasting, Conrad was taken to the haunted chamber and left there. He fell asleep by and by. When he awoke again and looked about him, his heart stood still with horror. The whole aspect of the chamber was changed. The walls were mouldy and hung with ancient cobwebs. The curtains and beddings were rotten. The furniture was rickety and ready to fall to pieces. He sprang out of bed, but his quaking knees sank under him, and he fell to the floor. "This is the weakness of age," he said. He rose and sought his clothing. It was clothing no longer. The colors were gone. The garments gave way in many places while he was putting them on. He fled, shuddering, into the corridor, and along it to the great hall. Here he was met by a middle-aged stranger of a kind countenance, who stopped and gazed at him with surprise. Conrad said, "Good sir, will you send hither the Lord Ulrich?" The stranger looked puzzled a moment, then said, "The Lord Ulrich? Yes, if you will be so good." The stranger called, "Wilhelm!" A young serving man came, and the stranger said to him, "Is there a Lord Ulrich among the guests?" "I know none of the name, so please your honor." Conrad said hesitatingly, "I did not mean a guest, but the lord of the castle, sir." The stranger and the servant exchanged wondering glances. Then the former said, "I am the lord of the castle." "Since when, sir?" "Since the death of my father, the good Lord Ulrich, more than 40 years ago." Conrad sank upon a bench and covered his face with his hands while he rocked his body to and fro and moaned. The stranger said in a low voice to the servant, "I fear me this poor old creature is mad. Call someone." In a moment several people came and grouped themselves about, talking in whispers. Conrad looked up and scanned the faces about him wistfully. Then he shook his head and said in a grieved voice, "No, there is none among ye that I know. I am old and alone in the world. They are dead and gone, these many years that cared for me. But sure some of these aged ones I see about me can tell me some little word or two concerning them." Several bent and tottering men and women came nearer and answered his questions about each former friend as he mentioned the names. This one, they said, had been dead 10 years, that one 20, another 30. Each succeeding blow struck heavier and heavier. At last the sufferer said, "There is one more, but I have not the courage to. Oh, my lost Katerina!" One of the old dames said, "Ah, I knew her well, poor soul. A misfortune overtook her lover, and she died of sorrow nearly 50 years ago. She lieth under the linden tree without the court." Conrad bowed his head and said, "Ah, why did I ever wake? And so she died of grief for me, poor child. So young, so sweet, so good. She never wittingly did a hurtful thing in all the little summer of her life. Her loving debt shall be repaid, for I will die of grief for her." His head drooped upon his breast. In a moment there was a wild burst of joyous laughter. A pair of round young arms were flung about Conrad's neck, and a sweet voice cried, "There, Conrad mine, thy kind words kill me. The farce shall go no further. Look up and laugh with us. 'Twas all a jest." And he did look up, and gazed in a dazed wonderment, for the disguises were stripped away, and the aged men and women were bright and young and gay again. Katerina's happy tongue ran on, "'Twas a marvelous jest, and bravely carried out. They gave you a heavy sleeping draught before you went to bed, and in the night they bore you to a ruined chamber where all had fallen to decay, and placed these rags of clothing by you. And when your sleep was spent and you came forth, 2 strangers, well instructed in their parts, were here to meet you. And all we, your friends in our disguises, were close at hand to see and hear, you may be sure. Ah, 'twas a gallant jest. Come now, and make thee ready for the pleasures of the day. How real was thy misery for the moment, thou poor lad! Look up and have thy laugh now." He looked up and searched the merry faces about him in a dreamy way. then sighed and said, "I am aweary, good strangers. I pray you lead me to her grave." All the smiles vanished away. Every cheek blanched. Katerina sank to the ground in a swoon. All day the people went about the castle with troubled faces, and communed together in undertones. A painful hush pervaded the place which had lately been so full of cheery life. Each in his turn tried to arouse Conrad out of his hallucination and bring him to himself, but all the answer any got was a meek, bewildered stare, and then the words, "Good stranger, I have no friends. All are at rest these many years. Ye speak me fair, ye mean me well, but I know ye not. I am alone and forlorn in the world. Prithee, lead me to her grave." During 2 years Conrad spent his days, from the early morning till the night, under the linden tree, mourning over the imaginary grave of his Katerina. Katerina was the only company of the harmless madman. He was very friendly toward her because, as he said, in some ways she reminded him of his Katerina whom he had lost 50 years ago. He often said, "She was so gay, so happy-hearted, but you never smile, and always when you think I am not looking, you cry." When Conrad died, they buried him under the linden, according to his directions, so that he might rest near his poor Katerina. Then Katerina sat under the linden alone, every day and all day long, a great many years, speaking to no one, and never smiling. And at last her long repentance was rewarded with death, and she was buried by Conrad's side. Harris pleased the captain by saying it was a good legend, and pleased him further by adding, "Now that I have seen this mighty tree, vigorous with its 400 years, I feel a desire to believe the legend for its sake. So I will humor the desire, and consider that the tree really watches over those poor hearts, and feels a sort of human tenderness for them." We returned to Neckarsteinach, plunged our hot heads into the trough at the town pump, and then went to the hotel and ate our trout dinner in leisurely comfort in the garden, with the beautiful Neckar flowing at our feet, the quaint Dilsberg looming beyond, and the graceful towers and battlements of a couple of medieval castles called the Swallow's Nest and the Brothers, assisting the rugged scenery of a bend of the river down to our right. The seeker after information is referred to Appendix E for our captain's legend of the Swallow's Nest and the Brothers. We got to sea in season to make the 8-mile run to Heidelberg before the night shut down. We sailed by the hotel in the mellow glow of sunset and came slashing down with the mad current into the narrow passage between the dikes. I believed I could shoot the bridge myself, so I went to the forward triplet of logs and relieved the pilot of his pole and his responsibility. We went tearing along in the most exhilarating way, and I performed the delicate duties of my office very well indeed for a first attempt. But perceiving presently that I really was going to shoot the bridge itself instead of the archway under it, I judiciously stepped ashore. The next moment I had my long-coveted desire. I saw a raft wrecked. It hit the pier in the center and went all to smash and scatteration like a box of matches struck by lightning. I was the only one of our party who saw this grand sight. The others were attitudinizing for the benefit of the long rank of young ladies who were promenading on the bank, and so they lost it. But I helped to fish them out of the river down below the bridge, and then described it to them as well as I could. They were not interested, though. They said they were wet and felt ridiculous and did not care anything for descriptions of scenery. The young ladies and other people crowded around and showed a great deal of sympathy, but that did not help matters, for my friends said they did not want sympathy, they wanted a back alley and solitude. Chapter 20. Next morning brought good news. Our trunks had arrived from Hamburg at last. Let this be a warning to the reader. The Germans are very conscientious, and this trait makes them very particular. Therefore, if you tell a German you want a thing done immediately, he takes you at your word. He thinks you mean what you say. So he does that thing immediately, according to his idea of immediately, which is about a week. That is, it is a week if it refers to the building of a garment, or it is an hour and a half if it refers to the cooking of a trout. Very well. If you tell a German to send your trunk to you by slow freight, he takes you at your word. He sends it by slow freight. And you cannot imagine how long you will go on enlarging your admiration of the expressiveness of that phrase in the German tongue before you get that trunk. The hair on my trunk was soft and thick and useful when I got it ready for shipment in Hamburg. It was bald-headed when I reached Heidelberg. However, it was still sound. That was a comfort. It was not battered in the least. The baggagemen seemed to be conscientiously careful in Germany of the baggage entrusted to their hands. There was nothing now in the way of our departure. Therefore, we set about our preparations. Naturally, my chief solicitude was about my collection of ceramics. Of course, I could not take it with me. That would be inconvenient and dangerous besides. I took advice, but the best bric-a-brackers were divided as to the wisest course to pursue. Some said, pack the collection and warehouse it. Others said, try to get it into the Grand Ducal Museum at Mannheim for safekeeping. So I divided the collection and followed the advice of both parties. I set aside for the museum those articles which were the most frail and precious. Among these was my Etruscan tear jug. I bought this tear jug of a dealer in antiquities for $450. It is very rare. The man said the Etruscans used to keep tears or something in these things, and that it was very hard to get hold of a broken one now. I also set aside my Henri II plate. This is very fine and rare. The shape is exceedingly beautiful and unusual. It has wonderful decorations on it. It cost more than the tear jug. As the dealer said, there was not another plate just like it in the world. He said there was much false Henri II ware around, but that the genuineness of this piece was unquestionable. He showed me its pedigree, or its history, if you please. It was a document which traced this plate's movements all the way down from its birth, showed who bought it, from whom, and what he paid for it, from the first buyer down to me, whereby I saw that it had gone steadily up from 35 cents to $700. He said that the whole ceramic world would be informed that it was now in my possession and would make a note of it with the price paid. I also set apart my exquisite specimen of old blue china. This is considered to be the finest example of Chinese art now in existence. I do not refer to the bastard Chinese art of modern times, but that noble and pure and genuine art which flourished under the fostering and appreciative care of the emperors of the Chungalung-Fung dynasty. There were masters in those days, but alas, it is not so now. Of course, the main preciousness of this piece lies in its color. It is that old, sensuous, pervading, ramifying, interpolating, transboreal blue which is the despair of modern art. However, I must not be frittering away the reader's time with these details. I did not intend to go into any detail at all at first, but it is the failing of the true ceramiker, or the true devotee in any department of bric-a-brackery, that once he gets his tongue or his pen started on his darling theme, he cannot well stop until he drops from exhaustion. He has no more sense of the flight of time than has any other lover when talking of his sweetheart. The very marks on the bottom of a piece of rare crockery are able to throw me into a gibbering ecstasy. And I could forsake a drowning relative to help dispute about whether the stopple of a departed Buon Retiro scent bottle was genuine or spurious. Many people say that for a male person, bric-a-brac hunting is about as robust a business as making doll clothes or decorating Japanese pots with decalcomania butterflies would be, and these people fling mud at that elegant Englishman Byng, who wrote a book called The Bric-a-Brac Hunter, and make fun of him for chasing around after what they choose to call his despicable trifles.